silent, you'll not find love. Only sleepless nights. I'm just a ghost of the man I was, too weary to fight.
Hey guys, welcome to Beyond the Beard podcast. Tim, welcome on, man.
Thanks, Tim.
It's
Thank you.
It's that was so wonderfully dainty, Tim.
Yeah, I know. Having a Tim introduce a Tim, I just like that effect.
Oh man,
Good.
It's wonderful. You can't have enough Tims, is what I always say. Mike, how you doing back there, buddy?
I'm doing good. I got to get used to the cameras all again here real quick. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little tired this morning.
Oh, a little bit.
Yeah.
I had men's group this morning, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, so did we. What's your excuse?
I'm old. I don't
Did
know.
you not drink enough coffee? Because I'm pretty sure we had like espresso, not brewed coffee this morning.
It was good stuff.
It was good stuff.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, Tim, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, man? Tell them a little bit about who you are, what you're currently doing, and then we'd love to hear a little bit about your story.
Sure. Yeah, so my name's Tim Hawkins. I have lived here in Colorado Springs for almost 7 years now. I'm married. My wife, Kayla, and I have been together for just over 13 years.
Awesome.
We have 3 boys, and what is it? They're almost aged up, so I'll just kind of give you their older ages, but they're 9, 7, and 4. I serve here in Colorado Springs as the lead pastor of Storied Church. Storied's been in existence as a gathering body of believers for just over 3 years.
Cool.
Yeah, back July 11th. And so I've been in formal church ministry for nearly 15 years now. But yeah, so that's one thing I do, and it's a joy to get to be a part of a church body.
That's cool.
I'm sure some of that will come up in the story as well.
Probably.
As a part of that, I'm an unpaid lead pastor. My wife and I have actually served as a missionary family, if you will. We raised our own support for this church plant. And you do that because you know a church plant early on, like you have no expectations that they're going to support you. The part we didn't expect was, in light of not having to take an income from the church, we were able to use those funds to immediately meet needs, serve people. Again, that'll come up probably a little bit later. Well, we love not taking an income and being able to use those funds elsewhere. And so we were like, hey, what's it look like to actually do this for the long term?
Yeah.
How do you maintain this? And so people have heard of like bivocational ministry. I'm technically what's called a co-vocational pastor. Co-vocational meaning that the second thing I do is not just a job for income.
Yeah.
It's very intentional. And so I am now, I've been working on this for the past year. I'm a professional leadership coach.
Yep.
And so I do that as kind of the other thing. I meet with people for the sake of hopefully helping them become emotionally healthy, resilient, servant leaders. And so I've got clients who I meet with consistently.
Yeah.
And their whole goal is how do I become a better leader, not only from a self-leading standpoint, but from leading others as well.
Cool.
So on any given day, if you were to run into me, I'm either going to be preparing a message, meeting with somebody just to encourage them, or I'm in a coaching session with people because I love watching people be just kind of like equipped and championed in whatever it is they're pursuing.
Which is really cool.
Yeah.
Well, so obviously, you know, I asked you to come on because I really think you have a lot to share, man. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your story? How did you get to where you are now? And you know, I think what we want to hit on maybe is, or maybe if you'll kind of extrapolate on, you know, what, you know, like what part of, you know, what did masculinity play in your, in like how you came to be where you're at, you're at?
Yeah, that actually has a pretty important part of my story is how I would say I did not see masculinity being lived out.
Yeah.
So I am one of 8 boys. I'm the second youngest of 8 boys. And it's a mixed bag kind of family. My dad was married, divorced his first wife. They had 2 kids. My mom was married, had 3 children. Her first husband died tragically. My parents get together, have 3 more boys. And so I'm biologically related to all my brothers, just in various ways, but I'm one of 8 boys. And from a pretty early age, I can remember what manhood and masculinity was being portrayed as. When you're around that many guys all the
Yeah.
time, you
Mhm.
get kind of these nuanced and diverse ways of experiencing it. Two of my brothers and myself, highly athletic. Three other brothers, I would consider them very like intellectual,
Yeah.
worked well with their hands. They were not athletes, but nonetheless just hard workers. And two of my other brothers I did not get a chance to really spend a lot of time with, but they
Yeah.
kind of erred in the same direction as the athletic approach to life. But anyway, so early on in life, you know, my mom and dad did not have a very good relationship.
Mm.
I can remember early on just tumultuous days. Like
Yeah.
there was a palpable feeling in my home when you walked in there of dissension, chaos, if you will. And so we kind of lived in the midst of that. I can recall early on, like, if you were to ask me probably around age 15, like, hey, what do you think it means to be a man? There's a possibility out of my stupidity and ignorance, I would have said, yeah, tell your wife what's up and tell other people what's up. Because that's what I saw taking
Yeah.
place. Pornography was a big deal. So
Yep.
early on, you know, I told my brother this a couple months ago. I was like, hey, did you know that I got caught onto porn because you were watching it one night?
Dang.
And the doorknob on your door was out, like it was gone, it wasn't there. And so I'm watching you, like watching the TV screen through
door.
the
Oh my
people.
gosh.
And so I like, you know, obviously that had a pretty big impact on me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my parents and my dad had I would say probably the most involvement in understanding what it meant to be a man early on.
Yeah.
Eventually my parents at 15, I think they'd been married 21 years. I was 15 years old. They divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to see what it was like to not have like that example of masculinity, of
Sure.
manhood in my life, and trying to figure out what that looked like. And so early on, it was confusing and all over the place, just scratching after stuff.
Yeah.
Athletics, like if I compete and perform well, then that kind of raises my status as a guy.
Yeah.
I was told early on, even within like Boy Scouts, like men do this, like men
Yeah.
should be out and about and very engaged in all of the, almost a little bit of like some barbarian ways of living.
Yeah.
Which I don't discount. It's just, those were things. So it was a lot of information,
Sure.
ton of stuff that I had to filter through.
So what kind of, I mean, when you say barbarian, like, are you talking about like hunting, fishing,
Yeah.
like the classic?
Yeah, learn how to tie a knot, know how to clean a
Okay.
fish,
Yeah.
know how to, you know, I mean, start a fire. Like there were times I remember growing up, like there were certain things that, I'm a city boy. I was from Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah.
You know how I start a fire? I put a piece of wood outside during the summer and watch the heat within Arizona become hellishly hot, and it just spontaneously combusts.
Yeah.
Like I didn't learn any of these things, but then we would engage in some of this stuff, and you know, my mind was only able to manage so much, but there were aspects of trying to figure out like, so what does it mean to actually be a guy? What's it mean to be a man?
Sure.
How does this engage? And with all that information, you kind of sometimes just stumble forward
Yeah.
figuring it out.
Where does, I mean, obviously you being a pastor, where does religion fit into this? Where does faith fit into this?
Yeah, so I didn't actually become a disciple of Jesus, a Christian, until 19. Although I had been raised within the church, it was more of a cultural Christianity.
Right.
I would have called our family pseudo-Christians.
Sure.
It was just kind of what we did. Surprisingly, Sunday was the most tumultuous day typically of the week. One of my parents would end up walking the 3 miles home because they got into this
Oh my
rancid
goodness.
fight. And I'm like,
oh
well,
my
yep.
goodness.
And you know, the other part about it is I didn't take anything about Christianity seriously on Sundays because I was kind of just fending for myself.
Yeah.
I typically would leave youth group or like the Sunday school,
Yeah.
sneak out.
Yeah.
I'd go catty corner to the 7-Eleven, and then I'd lift candy bars.
Oh my gosh. That's
Take them back to
yeah.
take them back to the holy place of God and be like, oh God, this Snickers bar you provided, Lord, thank you. The camera at the 7-Eleven apparently was just pointed in the wrong direction, and that was your providence.
that had to have been, man.
yeah. Please, everybody listening, just know that is tongue in cheek there.
Right.
Don't go
Yeah, that's
join
that's
that.
not your theology.
No. So I came to faith at 19, and I remember the church I was a part of, the senior pastor. It was a mega church. The senior pastor there like was very bravado.
Okay.
Like
yeah.
men do this, and that actually was compelling to me because
Yeah.
it at least gave me a sense of like the way in which men are willing to step into the gap and fight
Yeah.
for what is right. The willingness to lead. Because come on,
Sure.
I'll just be honest. like the concept of leading, like what is leading?
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
in charge. I have positional authority.
Yeah, I tell you what to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I remember at 19, the senior pastor of this large church, if you would have asked me like, what's a man? I'd been like, he is.
That dude.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he is. Like he would talk often about like, I'm willing to go to prison for what I believe in. And I'm like, dang, bro.
Yeah.
Great. If
Let's
anybody
go.
asks me what I believe, I'll be like, hey, go to Don. It's what he believes. He'll go to prison for me. Okay. I don't have to yet. So that's what I remember is like when faith finally came into the floor, like when my worldview shifted,
Yeah.
an aspect of like being a guy, what it meant to be a man,
Yeah.
masculinity finally was given at least some air of discretion in my
Yeah.
life.
You're starting to get a picture of it
Mhm.
a little bit.
Whether it was right or wrong, doesn't matter.
Sure.
I finally was at least given something to frame with all of the influence of the culture.
Sure. So, okay. So from there, would you say, when would you say you felt like you were a man? Like when, I mean, was it starting there? Did you kind of like, okay, I'm 19. I found my faith. I have somebody that I'm starting to see maybe what looks like a man. Like when would you say you kind of like started feeling like a man?
Well, so if you were to ask me, like, when did you first like take ownership of masculinity or feeling like a man, it would probably go back to when I first started watching porn.
Interesting.
And I realized I want to be very sensitive to this as well. But when I first understood what masturbation was,
Yep.
I thought this aspect of control of my like sensuality and gratification
Yep.
meant something of manhood to me.
Yeah.
And I was addicted to porn for 20 years.
Yep.
So it took, starting off, gosh, I think I was around 6 or 7 years old when I first engaged with it. So there was a component of I'm a man because I can do this.
Right.
So that was ingrained in me early on.
Yeah.
When I finally confronted that was when there was an aspect, and this did come from a faith movement like Christianity. I see Jesus in essence confront this concept of self-gratification.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, you're telling me that capability, ability, strength under control,
Yeah.
like that actually communicates something more of how
Yeah.
God has created me as a man, as a guy. That's when I started taking ownership of what was kind of rampant and just running amok.
Yeah. No, I love that, man. I think when we think about masculinity, there is an ownership that has to happen, right? And I love how you talked about ability versus capability, right? Just because you have the ability or even capability to do something doesn't mean you should do it.
Mhm.
And then, okay, so 19, and you got into ministry. Did you go to, or how did that come about?
Yeah. So what ended up happening is I was on a basketball scholarship my first semester out of high school.
Okay.
And so, hot to trot.
Yep.
Feel like I'm all big
Yep,
and bad.
big man on campus.
Yeah, whatever. I was 12th man on the court. Come on, let's be honest. But nonetheless, like that played into the air of I can just pursue and do whatever I want. That first semester, so I was still a virgin, and I kind of had wrestled with that. All about hearing
Yeah.
about like what is this whole virgin mindset. And so in high school, I had friends who were engaging in sex, and it was a big deal. But for
Yeah.
whatever reason, I held off. When I got into college, I met a girl. She was serving at a bar, and within 2 weeks, we were having sex. We were sleeping
Sure.
together. And if you would have asked me in that moment, like Tim, like, are you a man? I've been like, dang right, I am.
Right.
I
Yeah.
met a girl, and this is now what we're engaging with. And actually, what came about is we only were together for about a month,
Dang.
and I was broken. I
Yeah.
found that like the indulgence in sex left me so empty.
Yeah.
The vanity of it
Yep.
left me so empty. It did not give me any aspect of masculine identity.
No.
Do I understand sex to be a part that a guy and a gal get to play in together? Yes, but the actual act itself,
Yeah.
like from a satisfaction
Yeah.
standpoint, it didn't do it. And so it was at that point that I actually began recognizing there was a conviction. I would attest that to the Holy Spirit.
Sure.
And there was a desire to have something more. And that's the example of Jesus really front and center. I was like, if Jesus as a man, obviously God in human
Yeah.
form, but came as a man, like his way of living is what began to compel me toward change and toward understanding masculinity, not necessarily from just a prescriptive mindset, like
Yeah.
this is what a man is.
Yeah.
I'm like, I look and he's describing by his very way of living, that compels me.
What specifically, like what were the things that you really hooked on to that Christ was doing that like you're like, oh, that's a man right there.
Yeah. So there's a couple quick stories, and I apologize ahead of time. I am a preacher,
He's a pastor, so
I'm a
he's a little
preacher.
long-winded.
but like there are a couple stories that stand out to me. Now, for anybody listening, and if you're like a Greek, New Testament scholar, you might sit and say, well, is that story really in the Gospel of John? I'm like, I think it happened because it was there. The woman caught in adultery. Jesus' willingness to look into that situation, the religious leaders bring this woman, and I think they actually set her up. Like they were trying to test Jesus, obviously, in the story. But Jesus sits and goes, you know what? I will step right into the gap of this and protect this woman while also being able to speak into the truthfulness of stuff. I watched that and I'm like, dang, bro, that's not taking a bullet. Like it's one thing to step in front of a train and push somebody out of the way, like this really quick moment. He was willing to step into like the social norms of the day and put his credibility and his life on the line to be able to care for somebody. Confront the hypocrisy and the nastiness. Like I saw that and I was like, I want to do that. I'm a very justice-oriented individual. Don't ask me about Enneagram. I know me. Like I'm an 8 on Enneagram. I challenge stuff. That justice pursuit really speaks to me. So when I see an injustice take place, there's a moment where I got to check my heart because I'm like, no, don't punch the person, or don't drop kick them, or don't hit them with your car. Like you're gonna save a life. But actually being willing to get into the middle of it and stand in the gap, man, and then have the conversation. That was a big one. And there's a bunch of other stuff that Jesus does. Obviously, like his willingness to submit to God's will when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane. That speaks to me. Like he wrestled with the reality of his soon-to-be crucifixion for the sake of mankind. But he also recognized that when he took on sin, this was a separation from God for a moment. And he's like, I'm going to pursue your will because it's your will. Right. Again, I'm sitting here going, it's always been my will. My will be done, Lord. I've got an opportunity to do it. I should do it. Right. And so that, again, kind of like strength under control. That was huge. I felt like that was an aspect of like true masculinity again. That was on display just in Christ's life. And those are only a couple stories. They're all over the place.
I think, well, and I think too, you're also talking about, I think guys have a sense of duty. I think that is something that drives a lot of guys is we feel compelled to do something that is not only worthwhile and meaningful, but like there is substance to it, and there's an allegiance to that. And so you talk about Christ's willingness and following the Father. That's and I think that's a great display of masculinity, right? And I think you see it. I think you see it across society, right? Like you see it with soldiers. I think that's the easiest example, right? The idea of I am part of this mission, and it is my duty to carry out the things that are prescribed for me to do. These are the things I have to do, because if I don't do these things, guess what's going to happen? That mission's going to fail. And I think for guys, that's a huge component of, I think, what drives men.
Yeah, I appreciate how you say that, because what comes to mind is being able to appropriately own the essential role that men play in the relationships they have with others. And we can start this from early on within a family, in relationships with other men and women. We can tease this out when you actually are leading a family, when you're a husband and a father, is that there is, you have an essential part to play in this, and passivity in those is the death of some beautiful things that can take place. And that's, again, one of the things about Jesus is that you look at his life, Jesus is not a passive agent by any means.
Sure.
I know we were talking about this morning as we were doing Bible study. It's like Jesus, the things right before him, he never lost sight of the bigger vision.
No.
But right before him, he dealt with things. He was not passive on it. And there are days, I'm a dad of 3, love my wife to death. There are days where I'm like, I just kind of want to sit back and let everything else be. And in those moments, I'm like, dang, I'm missing opportunities and likely missing some really transformative moments, not only for me, but for others.
No, that's good. That's good. So maybe, man, I want to kind of talk about, what are your thoughts on the way that you see scriptures telling men to live? Like what are they telling, how are they telling men that we should be acting? And I mean, you can kind of come at this from whatever angle you want, but I think one of the things that we want to get to is, there seems to be this loss of respect for history for our society, right? Like we are in this day and age where it's like, no, we are defining everything by what is happening right now. There's this lack of wanting to look back from the past and learn from it. So, I mean, biblically and historically, like, what do you see played out as what men are supposed to be?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Let me think which direction I'm going to take with that for a moment. I think one, like the scriptures that we have before us provide God's perspective on this is kind of how things need to be, guys.
Yeah.
And so within the scriptures as well, if we're going to allow the Lord to have his rightful place in determining what these things are, all the topics and various aspects that make up the scriptures, I think we have to be able to willingly accept the fact that if what we have before us is meant for our good, then we have to assume that anything apart from that we're still living out needs to be confronted. So as you're pointing out, if we're going through life and we're allowing just kind of the ways and means of everyday living to dictate what it is we do, then we're likely living a slightly deceived life because the culture around us does not have any sort of non-impact.
Right.
You know,
Right.
There's always forces at play. And so when you look at the scriptures and you read through them, you quickly catch a glimpse of, wow, this is kind of contrasting to things. And that's kind of the point. Mankind does not save itself.
Right.
The scriptures are very clear about that. That's meant to compel us to a recognition of, well, then I should stop trying to earn my way, whatever that looks like.
Right.
But when you get into some of the aspects of masculinity, as far as I can see them when I read through the scriptures, you get not so much a prescription, because the scriptures are being written to people in space and time, and some of these things were automatically assumed.
Sure.
You know, there's reasons why some of the hottest topics within the culture today, antagonists of Christianity would sit and say, well, the Bible doesn't clearly talk about this.
Right.
Yeah, but the Bible's point, the scripture's point, is to help humanity understand that you need a savior in light of a sin issue.
Yep.
Like that's the big thing. And Jesus Christ is that answer.
Yeah.
The things that are brought up in the scriptures in light of that are implications of faith in Christ, what the people of God should look like.
Yeah.
But in those, you see all these stories. For instance, I was thinking about this in light of some of your questions. Right at the onset in Genesis.
Yeah.
You know, you got Adam and Eve.
Yep.
They've been given this command by the Lord to enjoy everything.
Yep.
And to steer clear of one thing.
Yep.
Satan walks in, goes after Eve, which is that strategical. Like,
right.
The adversary is smart and shrewd.
Yep.
Goes after Eve because Eve was not the one who was given the initial command by God. It was Adam.
Interesting.
Adam's role is to share that, to pass that along. So in the moment when Eve is being deceived by Satan, you know what Adam does? He gets passive.
Yep. He's just hanging out back there.
He is. He's listening. He's watching it take place. Perhaps maybe he thought that he had shared it and Eve would.
Sure.
But his willingness to partake in that sinful act gives us a glimpse of what masculinity is not.
Right.
It is not passivity.
Right.
Like Adam, again, if we could go back and tell Adam what to do, we would all probably say, Adam, speak up.
Yeah.
Clarify for Eve how Satan has taken a distorted command by God and is feeding it to her in a way that she just lavishes over. I think for men and women too, but I think for men, one of the roles in the scriptures as a patriarchal society was to take the lead in ensuring that what God was communicating is being appropriately provided to the community at large.
Yeah.
Like Eve was given to Adam, and I mean that in the sense of like God sits and goes, Adam, it's not good for you to be by yourself. Eve is going to aid you in experiencing my will. But you both have a part to play.
Yep.
And in this particular instance, that passivity was huge.
Yeah.
You know, take that today.
Right.
I imagine you probably have illustrations and stories of this.
Yeah.
Passivity. Man, it plays out in really chaotic and nasty ways.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the reasons why society is where it's at. Guys we have stepped back from our roles in being that leader, in being that voice that says, no, this is wrong. No, this is not what we were asked to do, or this is what we were commanded to do. And, you know, we've really kind of abdicated that responsibility. And we've said, here, you guys take over this because we don't want all of the responsibility because that's no fun.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the word patriarchal society.
Mhm.
That's such a controversial like topic right now, right? Like everybody is talking about, oh, the patriarchy has oppressed us, and this like, is that the way it was biblically? Like, tell me a little bit about that, because I think that maybe that's not quite how things were played out.
I think what we need to bear in mind, if you were to read the Bible and look at society as a whole, is typically, yes, it was patriarchal.
Sure.
But like God steps in and is trying to help like the nation of Israel. So
Sure.
again, however you read this, Genesis through Deuteronomy is being given to the nation of Israel after they come out of 400 years of slavery in
Yeah.
Egypt. They've lost identity of who they are. So
Yeah.
God's like, this is who I am. This is who you are. And watching within, the nation of Egypt, you have a Pharaoh.
Yeah.
He is God and he determines all. Everybody bows to his whim. Well, you come in to this moment with the community of faith of Israel, and God's like, guess what? He's not God. I am.
Yeah.
And I'm going to set the precedent for what it looks like for you to give of yourselves for the sake of others. You're a nation that's meant to be a light to all the other nations
Yep.
so that they could experience my grace. Right there. If you establish example from your deity to humanity, Pharaoh doesn't give you an adequate view
No.
of what it looks like to actually be a man, because his ways, his might makes right.
Right.
God steps in and says, just so you know, I actually am going to do the work of bringing you to a place of wholeness.
Yeah.
And I'm going to set an example of what it looks to be compassionate and kind and gracious, to give of yourselves for the sake of other. So right from the onset, the patriarchal society is meant to be redeemed because it was not healthy and it wasn't good. Now, does Israel get this right? Half the time?
No. No.
Probably majority of the time? No. And so they're constantly being reminded of what it looks like,
Right.
especially with the men and elders, to get this right so the rest of the nation would experience good. This is why Old Testament's littered with 95% of these kings are just idiots,
Yeah. Trash.
fools,
Yeah.
passive in their faith in
Yep.
God, and
Yep.
therefore active in all of their discretions
Yeah.
against the people.
Interesting.
So if they would have gotten this right, again, this is TMO, Tim's modest opinion here. Had they gotten this right, we would have seen a beautiful display of a patriarchal society being lived out in such a way that you'd have been like, it doesn't seem patriarchal.
Right.
It seems like sacrificially loving,
Right.
like servant leadership, which we obviously
Right.
get to see in Christ, who is the better Israel.
Right.
So.
Interesting. I think often when people are talking about these different, these structures, I think they're constantly looking at the downfall of, the shortcomings of the individuals. And I mean, sometimes rightly so, right? There's plenty of examples where you have guys who are living in a selfish and indulgent way, and that leads to a lot of hurt within the community, right? But it sounds like what you're saying is like that's not what God had planned, period. For anybody, really.
No, I love. There's a word picture that comes to mind. I will not take credit for it. I think this is from Andy Stanley in one of the books that I read by him long ago. But I think his dog had broke open a tomato jar, like a tomato sauce jar, and just made a mess everywhere.
Yeah.
And his question is what do you do in a moment when you have this massive mess everywhere? You have glass shattered, you have sauce splattered everywhere. You step into it and you begin the process of cleaning it up.
Yeah.
And so when we look at the situation with mankind, God steps into mankind's very terrible situation, including an upside down consequence of the sin in terms of like, how are men supposed to, like, look at what Adam was commanded to do.
Right.
God comes in and says, you know what? It's going to be really heinous. I'm going to step into the midst of this new relationship between man and woman and all that stuff. And I'm going to begin cleaning it up.
Yeah.
So if you look at it and you're like, well, God, you suck at your job, because obviously Israel couldn't figure this out.
Yeah.
You have to recognize he is trying to bring about inspirational compulsion on behalf of the people to actually experience change. And you get a washcloth and you wipe off the baseboard. You pick up the shards of glass. And it takes time for this redemption to occur.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean, like, the time in which it takes for that to occur doesn't mean that wasn't, like, God didn't have a purpose intended.
Right.
We see this purpose intended in Eden. And we see that the purpose intended will one day again be experienced, where there is this Christ-like transformation, sacrificial giving,
Right.
thinking of others.
Right.
Like, so masculinity needs to really bear in mind that despite the fact that we're always having to navigate the hard stuff,
Yeah.
like God does have a desire for us to experience the ideal, not because it's his ideal, but because it's his ideal for the good of mankind.
Yeah.
And again, men have an essential part to play in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you being a pastor and, being in the church for a while, what are you seeing? I mean, are you seeing that played out currently in the modern church? Like, how are you seeing masculinity be talked about in church? Because I grew up in church, and, one of the things that really just pissed me off was this portrayal of guys as like meek and mild and soft spoken, and, and so there's been a part of me that's always been drawn to, the stories of David being the conquering hero, right? Like being out there, and just, destroying the Philistines, or you have Samson, or, or even just modern stories of guys just like really being awesome. What are your thoughts on how the church portrays masculinity? Because I don't know, I have an issue with it personally, at least the church I grew up in. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Man, Tim, that feels like a loaded question.
It's
Can you
a
tell me
little
how
bit.
you really feel? Do you have the beep button ready?
Oh yeah, we're ready to go with that.
Oh, sorry, I just whacked this thing. I mean, so first of all, I tend to be what's called a paleo theologian.
Yeah.
So I tend not to take my definition and understanding of things from modern day, like writers, commentators and stuff.
Okay.
I really want to work backwards. So like the scriptures, what do the scriptures tell
Yeah.
us? Oftentimes what happens today is because of a lack of being able to think theologically. So not just reading the Bible, but seeing the themes and trends that connect together
Yeah.
to give a full picture of something.
Yeah.
We often get these sound bites.
Yeah.
And so some of those sound bites can be, it's like, look at the men within the Bible. It's
Yeah.
like, they're just whacking everybody. And, there's this amazing candor to them and charisma. And the reality is if you go through and you look at all the men in the Bible, like there's a humble place we have to acknowledge. They all screwed up.
Yeah.
They all did.
Yep.
Noah screwed up.
Yep.
Noah screwed. And like, so early on, the fall of mankind, death comes in because of sin. So
Yep.
if anybody's curious, does sin exist? Just look at death. Death exists. Sin exists.
Right.
But in the midst of that, God promises one will come and save. And you have all these figures.
Yeah.
Noah, Abraham, you've got Eli the priest.
Yep.
You've got David.
Yep.
You've got, Samson.
Yep.
And the amazing thing is they all have this beautiful aspect of the character and image of God,
Yeah.
but they fail miserably in
Right.
other ways. And they're proven they're not the hero. They're not the savior.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that's a big deal for us because as we look at the characters from scripture, especially as guys, we cannot pull our example from any one of these in and of themselves because they fail miserably.
Mm-hmm.
But you can begin to at least appreciate some of the things that they were willing to do.
Sure.
One of the themes that you see in the midst of all of these guys, initially, they screw up royally, is there's a faith component. There's a humility to acknowledge. At some point in the story, there's a humility
Yeah.
to acknowledge, Lord, you're in control and your ways are best.
Right.
That's a big deal.
Yep.
But, communicate that compared to, well, David was willing to go and face the 9-foot Goliath and
Yeah.
like, I want to do that. And it's like, well, we don't have 9 feet Goliaths unless I go and take on like some NBA basketball player
Yeah.
who is 7 feet and a half foot tall.
Yep.
And like we don't have that kind of stuff happening necessarily today. And so being able to take, again, a description of
Yep.
masculinity
Yep.
and find some compulsion to that, I think we grab onto that.
Yeah.
But it oftentimes can leave us feeling pretty empty because you're constantly looking for opportunities to prove yourself a man.
Right.
Whereas God comes and says, you don't need to prove yourself.
Interesting.
Humbly submit yourself to me and I will speak life into you.
Huh.
So that's one of those things for me where like any of the modern day books that say like we gotta redeem this concept of masculinity that we've lost, that we see in the scriptures, I would sit
Yeah.
and say, hold on, contextualize stuff. There is a quality of man that I think we have to bear in mind is more important than everything else.
Right.
And it is the willingness to bow our knee to an almighty God.
Mm.
We start there, other things begin to come into the fray, which is why those characters, all of them, they all get humbled.
Sure.
Whether they humble themselves
Right.
or they are humbled.
Right.
Humility is a big deal.
Right.
And so that then begins to at least give some space to, okay, what do we learn from David when he steps in?
Right.
What do we learn from Samson? What do we learn from like even some of the prophets?
Yeah.
Some of the prophets give beautiful, beautiful examples of what it means to be like a guy.
Yep.
I've been given a word by God. I'm going to go speak it. And you know what's going to happen? They're going to throw me in a dirty well.
Yep. Yep.
But I'd rather be humble and obedient because that is ultimately what I've been called to
Right.
as somebody who's been given God's word to go forward, whatever that looks like.
Right.
So there's a humility, I think, that needs to be acknowledged first and foremost.
Would you say that humility is kind of a foundational component to masculinity?
Yes. So Paul's letter to the Philippians, it's called the kenosis, this willingness of Christ to not rid himself up, but set aside his divine powers, if you will,
Yeah.
in order to serve others and
Yeah.
not serve himself. That was humility. It was
Right.
because of the humility of Christ he did that. Like you want, again, this would be like the end of a message. You want to be a man, humble yourself.
Yeah.
Start there. Allow the Lord to speak to you in ways that are the most compelling and likely going to be the most fulfilling instead of grabbing after all these things that help you feel like a guy. But honestly, they're like they're just medicine.
Sure.
They're going to wear off.
Sure.
You're going to try and find something a little bit stronger next time.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be there.
So I'm thinking about guys who hear this. I mean, humility, especially in our culture now, is so, I'd say, negative. I mean, I think when people think of humility, they think of, I'm just gonna be a doormat. I'm gonna be, I don't have confidence. I don't, I'm too humble to stand up for myself. What are your thoughts on that? Because clearly we don't see that in the Bible, right? Like we see, again, just using David as an example, right? Like you see humility when he screws up. You see the humility of him when he's in the field, man. He's in constant communication with God because he understands that's where his strength comes from.
Yeah.
I don't know, like what are your how do we, I guess maybe my question is more of like, how do we display that humility nowadays? Right? In a way that's God honoring, that is honoring to, those in our sphere of influence, but also doesn't portray us as weak. I think for me personally, right? And then maybe it's a me thing.
It's okay. We all have those things.
Yeah, no, maybe there's a component there, but I do struggle with like, how do I remain humble, but then also like be strong?
Yeah. That's such a great question because you're not losing yourself in the midst of humility.
Sure.
You're finding yourself.
Yeah.
And humility is it's a willful acknowledgement of all that you are not. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging what you are. Like if I'm a strong guy physically, there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't identify you as more or less.
Sure.
It is an aspect of who you are currently. If you're soft-spoken as a guy, that doesn't make you weak.
Right.
It just means you're not a hardcore kind of charismatic communicator. It doesn't make you any less. And so humility allows us to acknowledge who we are not.
Yeah.
Which is important. That's like to actually believe in Jesus is a very humble act because you're acknowledging I'm not savior. I can't work to earn this.
Yep.
And I need somebody else to help me. And that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is. Especially in our culture.
Oh yeah. I appreciate the guys who can do it all, but here's the deal. If you can do it all and know it all, likely you've been deceived and you're very prideful.
Yeah.
So if you can't receive help, that's a big deal. And humility reminds us of our humanity.
Right.
It reminds us of our weakness and frailty. And there's greater strength in that. So when it comes to masculinity, like this willingness to humbly acknowledge who you are not, what's at stake, how you actually can engage in something and how you can't.
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's inspirational.
Yeah. You're taking ownership of who you are, right? You're I think you probably talk about this with your coaching, right? Like the idea of operating out of your strengths. And
yeah. That part is really important too, because you can't be well-rounded. You can't. I know.
Come on,
all
Tim.
of our American audience
on.
here, if you're well-rounded, you have no point.
Yeah.
And truth is,
oh my gosh, that's good.
if you're well-rounded, you're
you have
also
no
probably.
point.
I know it doesn't sound bad, but I just like to jab it in there.
Yeah.
I played college basketball. I was told like you got to have all these things figured out. But then I finally had somebody sit and tell me like, Tim, you're a shooter. Stop posting up.
Mm-hmm,
I like posting up, coach. Yeah, but you're not good at it. You can invest all your time and effort into this, but you're not good at it. Do what you have been crafted to do.
Yeah.
And similarly with guys, it's like, why you got to try to be everything? You're not. Matter of fact, the more likely you are to give to everything, the outcome is probably going to be everything else is going to fall apart. Actually, everything probably will fall apart. So, but how do you, this is an acknowledgement though.
Yeah.
I'm not a doer. So I'm not a doer. If my wife watches this, she already knows this. I'm not a doer. I don't get things done. It is confessional moment here with Tim and Tim. I know, again, from the coaching standpoint, I work with Clifton Strengths, and I love to help people understand, how do you typically lead? I lead with these influencing talents. I'm not an influencer. You won't find me on social media. That's not what it means. But I'm more of like, how do I call people to team? How do I call people to do more? I know that's what I'm good at. I'm a great out-of-the-box thinker.
Yep.
But give me a list of things to do, I will disappoint you.
Yeah.
And that humble recognition has now given me space to actually have moments with my wife where she's like, why didn't you get this done? I'm like, I just didn't have the capacity margin to do it.
Right.
But it's also given me the freedom to acknowledge, how do I need to get things done?
Sure.
And it does not look the same as somebody else who's like a level 5 leader who is a high achiever. I'm not a high achiever.
Right.
Like, I'm more of a delegator and stuff. So all that humility has actually allowed me to have so much more impact in the relationships that matter most.
Sure.
Whole lot more joy. I don't have to manufacture energy anymore.
Well, and it's interesting that they bring that up, because it makes me think of, so, we have this concept of like alpha males now, right? And man, I think about it, and it's like these guys who are acting in these way, they're like covering up their deficiencies. Right?
I would say so. And likely it's a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
That's why if you're ever in a hardcore conversation with a guy and he suddenly raises up and gets really manly on you, it's like, whoa, like, what's the emotion underneath that's driving you to try to meet a need that's coming out in this way? Is it fear?
Right.
Is it a lack of security?
Yeah.
So a lot of these things, and again, positional authority, if you have position and that's where you find your identity in, well, it's going to come out that way.
Yeah.
I think healthy masculinity sits and goes, positional authority it's poo-poo.
Yep.
It's junk.
Yep.
I want moral authority. Like, I want to have moral authority in the lives of the people who I walk with, maybe actually have position over.
Yeah.
That's much more beautiful. Again, it's beautiful. It's inspirational. And so the humility thing, I would not downplay it.
No.
I would give it a lot of space. I do personally.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you want me to share a story?
Please. This is story time with Tim and Tim.
Yeah, story time with Tim and Tim. So 13 years ago, my wife and I got married. And 3 months into marriage, she got diagnosed with celiac disease. Now, in light of my parents' failed marriage and the ways in which I saw my dad be a pretty not so good husband, I was like, Lord, I want to be a better husband to my wife.
Yeah.
So if there's a way in which I can serve my wife and see that sacrificial kind of stuff that Jesus displays, like, use me for that.
Yep.
And be careful with what you pray for. And so 3 months into marriage, Kayla gets diagnosed with celiac disease. For anybody who doesn't know what that is, celiac disease, in essence, is an autoimmune disease. Your body attacks itself, and you have to steer clear of certain things, gluten in particular.
Yep.
And that was a big change for me.
Yeah.
Over the next year, Kayla went gluten-free, and I would go to work and eat my normal gluttonous and glutinous food.
Yeah.
And there came a point where she kept getting sick, even though she was on this strict protocol that was supposed to heal her.
Yeah.
Realized I had the kiss of death when I came home.
Oh my god!
I would eat my normal food, come home and give her a kiss, and like, her symptom was
poisoning her.
Yeah, she would get like 6 months pregnant. She would. That's the kind of inflammation she would experience. It was so severe. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm the reverse like Snow White effect here. This is not good. And I had to make a decision in that moment. What do I do when I potentially have my wife's life in my hands?
Yeah.
And came back to that moment where I asked the Lord before I ever met her, like, Lord, I want to be a husband that can sacrifice for my wife so that she experiences you, like a quality of you that's tangible. So I went gluten-free.
Yep.
And for 13 years, I've been gluten-free. And this past, this would have been about almost 4 months ago, we found out that she needed to go on, again, another strict diet. So we've been doing gluten-free. Our whole family's gluten-free.
Yeah.
It's just kind of the way of living. But then she had to go on this strict diet, hoping to like give her body a leg up.
Yeah.
I'm driving home from Texas. I'm on a 9-hour drive. She gets results back from a test, and we're on the phone, and she says, I have to do this protocol. And it's daunting.
Yeah.
And so I asked her, what would make it less daunting? And she said, would you do this with me? Like, would you take ownership of this with me?
Yeah.
So I listened to this book. I did not read the book on the drive. I listened to this book on the way home, took ownership of it. When we got home, I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this. And so I have been doing this new protocol with her, which has been insanely difficult.
Yeah.
But that was
you had to give up coffee.
I did. I gave up coffee.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that might be a deal breaker for me. I don't know.
Yeah, and if you think I'm like off my hinges, we just brought coffee kind of consistently back in. At least I did. After the 3 months, I'm a little jittery.
Yeah,
but it was my way of trying to reflect to her my willingness to love her sacrificially, and I can't claim anything else other than that early willingness to be humble, humble myself, to set aside my wants and my desires in order to elevate the good of my wife's needs.
Yeah.
And I knew going in this was going to have an impact on her, but I didn't realize what kind of impact it was going to have on me.
Expound on that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like what do you mean impact on you? Like, obviously it's like, oh, okay, well, you had to suffer because you were doing this really strict diet, but what do you mean by impact?
Yeah. So for instance, if my wife had a gun to her head, 5 feet apart, that way I can still fit in there. But if I could take a bullet for my wife or for my kids, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
Yep.
Like, I probably wouldn't even think about it.
Yep.
Ask me to step into this world where it's a lifestyle change, where I don't get to do the things I want to do. I do the things that I feel are necessary for the good of others.
Yeah.
Well, now that's going to require so much more of you. So I honor and applaud the people who are willing to give up their lives at a moment's notice for somebody else.
Absolutely.
But I argue, and I've said this before, sometimes like that's an aspect of God that almost just happens.
Yeah.
When you see Jesus at play, he makes the methodical, conscientious decision every time to step into the gap. Well, again, we do this 3 months of this new protocol of how we eat, live.
Yeah.
And it's been transformative for me because I've had such a higher degree of self-control in light of it.
Man.
I had to have self-discipline.
Yeah.
How do I walk with my wife in this thing if I don't control some of my impulses and desires? I came to find out I actually can have self-control. Some of the impulses and desires throughout my life that I've had that I thought I just need to give in to them.
Yeah.
That's what a guy does, right? You got a need, you meet a need.
That's right.
And you know what that means.
See a need, meet a need.
That's right. I've learned that does not have to be true. You can have this strength under control. That's something that I think, and Kayla's not here. She's told me enough times the impact it's had on her.
Yeah.
The impact it's had on me. I have such more of a confident realization of who I am in light of this whole thing. I did not think about that going in. I just thought, I'm going to serve you. I'm going to sacrifice for you. And now I've begun to recognize, wow, this sacrificial way of living for others, I could do this. Like I could do this because I see the impact it has, but I've seen the transformation in my own life and I want more of that.
That's cool. Man, I want to say two things. One, man, I love what you said there about your wife said, have to do this protocol. And then you said, okay, what is it? What does it take? And then you went and you took ownership of it. You went and you read and listened to it. And then you came back to her and said, okay, in order to do this, this is what we need to do. Like, I think that oftentimes it's easy for guys to be like, I'm going to tell you what to do. And what I love and what you did, you said, here's what we're going to do together. Here's the journey that we're going to walk together.
So I saw early on in my parents' marriage, it was kind of the dichotomy of the relationships. Like, oh, you're one flesh, but you clearly operate as two bodies. It's like, oh, and I've seen this in marriages too. I get a chance to have conversations with spouses who have to engage this kind of thing with their loved ones. Yeah. There's some things I can't take on. For instance, if I was diagnosed with cancer today, Kayla can't take my cancer on her, but she can journey with me in it.
Yep.
And she could go through the protocol. I'd be like, don't, if I had to do chemo, it's like, honey, don't do chemo. That's dumb.
Right.
You don't need to do chemo.
Right.
But there, I think, is a healthy willingness. Like, this is one of the things I would say, like, you want to be a man, be willing to serve somebody at your own cost. Not just for the outcome. It's not a means to an end, because you actually will learn through something like that just how much good it does for you.
Yeah.
Like the good of others at my expense is a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
And so in this thing with my wife, that's a cross that I choose to bear.
That's cool.
And I encourage spouses to do that. It's not easy.
No.
But again, if I get my definition of masculinity from what I see of Jesus and described in the scriptures, what I see is sacrifice for the sake of others, not sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice, where it's like, oh, my legacy is
look at how good I am. Yeah.
It's like, I'm willing to do this for the sake of others. And past couple of years, like we've been able to reflect on that. And I would say that's an aspect of like my manhood that I take a lot of comfort in, not pride in. I take a lot of comfort in because there's some fruit that's shown. And yet I say that, don't think I'm perfect at all. Like I still have my passive moments, and I'm like, I have moments where I humbly receive from my wife what she has to say because it's good. And I'm like, oh, this is a pill to swallow. It hurts. Just last night, like I barked at my son because he was kind of being a little stinker toward one of his brothers. And Kayla's like, Tim, that's the same thing he just did to Sutton. You just did to him. And I was like, don't tell me what I did, lady. I thought that. I didn't say that. Don't tell me my business. But it was one of those moments where I was like, all right, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. There's and again, the humility is not simply acknowledging it. Humility is actually doing something with it. And I think that's
cool.
good for masculinity.
Yeah. No, there has to be an action, right? Like just understanding something is great, but if you don't actually give it legs, it doesn't mean anything. The other thing that you said earlier that made me think of, have you ever read the book Uncommon by Mark Divine?
I have not.
It's man, I'm pretty, so he's a former Navy SEAL, entrepreneur. And Uncommon is really about helping people unlock their potential and like living a life that's uncommon. And so he has these like 5 mountains that he talks about and that you like basically conquer, and he walks you through like things you're going to do to help, kind of conquer those mountains. The first one he has is your physical body. And it's interesting that you said that like you realize the level of self-control that you had because of this diet. I think that that's really, really key. And I think that has so many implications across your whole life, right? When you can dominate and bring under submission your body, there's so many things that can follow from that, right? I see it in my like my ability to. I have been pretty consistent in the gym for a long time, and you're looking kind of
small. There.
I am a little small. I'm not as big as I want to be. I'll tell you that, man. It's there's some meme. It's like, first day, your first day at the gym is the biggest you'll ever be or whatever, because it's like there's this constant comparison. You're like, oh my gosh, that dude's huge. Oh my gosh,
it's such an inflated view of self.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, but I found that to be true in my life. It's like, and it gives you that reservoir of knowing that you can, right? You come across those things that are hard, those things that are trying, and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And then you can go, oh wait, what did I do? Look at these things. Like, look at the history I have with being able to conquer this. So I just love that you said that, because it just reminded me of that principle of like being able to control your body is really super foundational.
Yeah. I think where that impacts me is you get an understanding of what you actually need. And so when you can be honest with what you actually need, then you can be really aware of how to meet other people's needs, because you're not convoluted with all your wants.
Yeah.
So for instance, no offense to anybody who's watching this, but I do not have an affinity for vehicles. I used to. I don't anymore.
Yeah.
Because here's the deal. If I go and purchase that manly vehicle that's going to cost me $600 to $1,000 a month, just to fill my insecurity, I now have no margin to actually meet the needs of others.
True.
So by being able to humbly acknowledge what your need is, that frees you up to meet other people's needs.
So hard.
So like this thing with my wife, I realized I don't need sugar to survive. I don't need coffee to survive. I know
that right there is blasphemy,
right.
sir.
Our economy would crash if we actually took that advice. That's not advice. That's not advice at all.
There'd be a lot more violence if we all did that.
But yes, yes, there would be. And then we can all prove we're men.
That's right.
I'll grab the sword. But so the humility there and being able to have self-control, you recognize what you need and what you don't need.
Yeah.
And that's a really big thing. So when I meet with guys in particular
Yep.
who need all these things,
Yeah.
it's like, well, what does it look like meeting other people's needs? Well, it potentially is not there. I'm not saying it's not,
Yeah.
but potentially you don't have margin for it.
Yeah.
Because you're not paring down to what is essential in this life.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I love about Jesus' statement to his disciples. Hey, why do you guys worry about what you'll eat, what you'll drink, and what you'll wear? Don't you know that life is more than this?
Right.
And he's making a statement.
Yeah.
Life is more than worrying about these things.
Yeah.
In other words, I want you to have the faith that God will provide what you need. Self-control, self-discipline in that regard, I think can give men in particular a semblance of, this is actually what I need. And now I have some margin to recognize the needs of others. That's a big deal. When needs are convoluted with wants, this is where you begin to see a patriarchal society out of control for those that are. You begin to see manipulation and taking advantage of. I mean, I'm not going to get too much into this, but a lot of the men leaders of our country, I'm like, bro, do you actually have an idea of what your needs are, or do you only operate out of your wants because you care about nobody else?
Right.
Like, you communicate it and then we hear stories of it. But if we were to actually sit and go, here's my needs, I think as men, we'd find a compelling reason to engage others.
Yeah.
But again, from your standpoint, how do we have self-discipline over just our bodies?
Yeah. And it's hard too, because we live in a culture now that's so indulgent. Everything feels like a need, right? Because anything I want can be immediately met, period, whatever it is. I can order it on Amazon and have it here tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be real upset if it comes the next day, because that is unacceptable.
It is.
Right?
It is.
And so I think, especially the younger generations.
Sorry, that was tongue in cheek too.
I think, man, I my concern and my want for the upcoming generation, my concern is that, they're going to continue down this path that we, I think our generation, the generations before us, are responsible for, right? We have kids. We need to teach them about self-control, because it's really easy to go, here you go. Here's a switch. Here's a video game. Here's a TV. Here is sugar. Here is whatever.
And as men, here's a woman.
Yeah. 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 You don't even have to wait. You just have a click away.
Click away. But what happens when you get into a situation where you're actually with a woman?
Sure.
There is such a thing as marital rape.
Yeah.
It's where a guy who's a husband still believes his wife is an object. And so are we teaching self-control from the standpoint of they are not a means to your end?
Yeah.
And being able to control those urges as well.
Yeah.
Like all of those things, like you're mentioning, like teaching self-discipline and self-control, that's a elevation of, and maybe an amplification of, real strength.
Yeah. Well, and man, this is why this conversation is super important, because I think that if we can teach young men and old men, whatever, all these guys who hopefully listen to this, if we can teach those around us these principles, our culture gets better.
Absolutely,
our culture gets,
it does.
Women are treated better. Everybody gets treated better, because we are taking on the responsibility to provide and to create a secure environment and to love self-sacrificially and to ensure that others are better.
See, as you share that with me, I sit and think that's compelling. That's reason to get up every day. That's reason to be willing to give up some of what we think are our needs. They're really just wants for the sake of others. As you were sharing that, what came to mind is the moment Jesus is in the garden and he's about to be arrested, and his disciples think it's time to man up.
It's go time. Let's go.
It's time to man up.
Yep.
And he looks at me, he's like, what are you talking about? Don't you know I have at my beck and call the ability to call down like divine authority to take care of all this?
Yeah.
There's this massive strength under control.
Yeah.
And he calls his disciples to have that as well. Again, a humble recognition. And they missed it. They didn't understand what he was doing. But he's like, this is not strength.
Yeah.
This is fear.
Yeah.
And I'm not calling any of my followers to fear. You don't live out of fear.
No.
And so there's even in that beautiful moment, Jesus is sitting here telling him, I could, but for the sake of others, I will not.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I'm going to let myself be arrested and killed for the sake of others. That, again, that's a picture of what I think. And Jesus came as a man.
Yep.
So we have to acknowledge and honor that. That's a picture of masculinity.
Right.
And it's not for just death's sake. He did it for the sake of others. And we're dying to ourselves, recognizing I only need this. I don't need that. I can serve others. I can care for and love for
Yeah.
others.
But I mean, dying to yourself doesn't mean not having boundaries either, right?
Not at all.
I think that that's also something that really gets kind of it gets conflated, is that it's like, well, if I'm dying to myself, then I have zero boundaries.
No.
Right? I think I've seen that played out in marriages in my story,
Mm.
right? Where guys take that, oh, I have to sacrifice everything, and it's like this complete lack of boundaries, right? And so I don't know. I mean, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? Because I see that there is some unhealthiness there, right? Because
Hmm.
I think you see guys throughout history, throughout the Bible, standing up and saying, no, we're not doing this, or no, this isn't right, or no.
Yeah.
How do you see that play out?
So we're relational beings. And
Yep.
so masculinity needs to find its proper understanding and definition in relationship and community
Yeah.
with others. And if you don't have an understanding of why God established community, then you're going to miss a huge part of how your identity as a guy
Yeah,
plays out.
Sure.
God created community, people, so that they would help one another to experience God's will for their lives
Yep.
and to become more like Christ ultimately.
Yep.
So if you don't have that as this picture, as this target,
Yeah.
well, then when you get into marriage and it's an unhealthy situation,
Yeah.
and you're going after what you want, and you're not recognizing that we're actually in each other's lives to help us become more like Jesus,
yeah,
well, then you'll just sit and say, well, fine, it's not worth getting into with you. So I'm just going to be passive about it
Sure.
and let it go. Or I'm going to be domineering because it's all that I want.
yeah,
When my wife might have really good things to say that can help me to become more like Jesus, truly more masculine, if we're being honest.
sure,
So there has to be a recognition that there is something about masculinity that can only be understood in relationship with others. So all the
Mm.
pride and ego, megalomaniac approaches to life,
Yeah.
if you're not willing to accept the conversation, the engagement with others, you are going to miss out
yeah,
on some really big things. So in those moments in marriage, like if you're not wanting to listen to the other person that's
Sure.
really caring about who you are,
yeah.
no offense, you're a handicapped man.
Mm. Mm.
And I know that personally. When I'm not willing to allow my wife to speak into my life because
Sure.
she wants God's will to be fulfilled in who I am,
Yeah,
I'm handicapping myself.
sure.
And it's the same for her. She's not getting to experience the fullness of what God has for her if she's not willing to allow me to speak into her life.
Mhm.
And that takes trust and that takes time to cultivate.
Sure.
But both of us, God, thank you. Both of us have this recognition like we cannot accomplish what the Lord's calling us to without one another.
Mm.
I cannot be a man as I believe God is calling me to be.
Yeah.
She cannot be a woman as God is calling her to be without one another and without others.
Yeah.
Like it's just impossible.
Yeah, and you would say that you feel like you are fulfilling what God's called you to in that in living that
Well, I think so.
way.
Like I believe so. I'm willing to give myself for it, but that took time too. Like you have to be willing to confront. I grew up in a very unhealthy family
Yeah.
where like whatever my dad wanted to do, he just did. I had to like rip that away from me. I'm the
Sure.
spender, Kayla's the saver. My dad would just buy stuff.
Sure.
And then my mom would be like, what'd you buy this for? Because I wanted to.
Yeah.
So there was a recognition that's not a good thing. And it's taken a lot of time to still pull away from some of that. Like, I want it. I should have it. I'm going to go get
Yeah.
it. I'm like, well, that's not how that works in healthy community.
Yep.
And again, as a guy, it's like, this thought started with me, continues with me, and ends with me. It's probably not a good thought. It's probably deceptive.
Yeah. That's
So I
a
need to
good
bring
point.
somebody
Yeah.
else in to help me kind of flesh this out as reality.
Mm.
And within relationships, if that's not happening,
Yeah.
it's probably going to be a really unhealthy one,
Yep.
obviously.
Yep.
But you're just not giving yourself an opportunity to develop and grow in ways that are most transformative and true.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I asked the question because I think the image that I had of masculinity growing up was very self-sacrificial, but I guess it felt unhealthy to me. You know what I mean? Like to the point of taking blame for things that wasn't theirs to take.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm.
I think I saw my dad do that, and it was like, I understand the thought. I understand like the heart, but and maybe that's what my question is, or what I was asking more about is like boundaries, because I feel like there are times where it's important to have good boundaries and stand up for yourself in situations. I don't know. I guess I that's something I'm still trying to figure out how to navigate, because I saw what I would call an unhealthy selfish, an unhealthy self-sacrifice to the point of loss of self.
Okay. You could have just kindly said, Tim, you didn't answer my question. You
No, that's
ignoramus.
okay.
Will you do it again,
No,
please?
no, that's okay. No, I really liked what you had to say.
But I
because
see where you're going now.
Yeah,
with that.
no, that and yeah, and I probably wasn't super clear. And obviously there's part of being vulnerable and trying to be respectful. But also, yeah, I think the image I saw was somebody who I wouldn't consider strong.
Yeah.
And that's not to say like my dad's not strong. Right? Like this dude is 65. No, he's 60. Oh gosh, 67.
Yeah.
Right? And I think just this year was the first time he actually called me to help him pull something heavy off of a shelf. You know what I mean? So like it was the first time, the first time he's like, I was up at his house doing something, and he was like, hey, can you help me pull this down? Like I just can't, or whatever. And that's the first time.
So like a recognition of need.
Yeah. So that was the first time. I'm just saying, like, he's a strong dude.
Yeah.
Like I don't mean that, but what I saw was in the face of my mom, not zero strength. Like, and so for me, I've always struggled to be like, okay, where does that masculine strength and boundaries come in, right? Because you do have to, man, I absolutely believe when you have to be self-sacrificial, right? You have to take care of your family and your wife in a self-sacrificial way. But how do you navigate that without completely losing yourself in that too? Because I do think it can be easy to go, well, whatever, I'm just going to do whatever it is you say. And that's kind of what I saw too, was like this like lack of, and maybe that's what it was. Maybe it's lack of like ownership of leadership.
Yeah.
I don't know. Any thoughts on like having good boundaries?
Yeah. I guess I'll start with this. I'll just share kind of where I come from is like, in the event that if Kayla and I were in a situation where I felt like I was not being fulfilled or needs met, I think one of the healthy aspects of leadership is being able to communicate reality. And so if we're not willing to communicate and share those things, that's hard. I think this is an area that women oftentimes are a little bit better at, is they can communicate their needs.
Yeah.
Men grunt. I don't know. It's like I've met a lot of guys that they struggle to do that. And part of it is because for a long time, the generation of baby boomers kind of taught this concept of, well, I just meet my needs. I don't speak my needs.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Therefore, I also am not going to communicate my emotion, the feelings I have behind it, because we don't talk about those things.
Yeah.
The reality is like our emotions, what we have like a feeling that comes up in a situation, maybe like what you're kind of describing. That emotion is actually trying to drive us to meet a need. Emotion means to move out, and our emotions move us out to meet a need. But how can you in a relationship meet a need if you're not willing to express what the need is and actually express the impact it's having on you? So there is a little bit of the willingness to actually speak up. The other part about this that I think is really important for guys to consider is that there are some women who are they're gifted. Like the Lord has gifted them. And if you're married to a woman who is a little bit more of a front and center kind of leader, more of a communicator, and you're a little bit more kind of passive in terms of engagement, you're behind the scenes sort of person, is just recognizing that doesn't mean that you don't have opportunity to speak into it. It just means you're uniquely wired. Yeah. And so in some of those instances, even with Kayla and I, we've had to learn, like, we got to talk about this. Like, this is something that needs to be talked about. Either I'm missing something, you're missing something, but we got to actually communicate and talk about what's going on here, because that is always a good thing. Let's actually open up. Yeah. In the event, so I don't know, if you were in a pastoral counseling setting and you were telling me like, hey, Tim, like, I just pretty much back off and let my wife do whatever she wants to do. She gets her way. Yeah. Again, I would ask the question, okay, so what does your willingness to let her get her way on everything reveal about you? And in the event you were to sit and say, well, I feel like my needs are not important. Well, how much is that actually true? Right. And maybe the relationship's in a place where it's unhealthy. But for a guy to just kind of abdicate almost his thoughts and opinions on things, There's probably a lot more at work there.
Sure.
Maybe a good counselor is in need in some cases. But I would also sit and say, again, this is what I would say from a pastoral counseling standpoint is you have an essential part to play.
Yeah.
Like your words matter.
Yep.
Your needs are important as well.
Yeah.
And this is not just a me thing. This is a we thing. So if you're not going to speak up, if you're not going to engage, then you've handicapped your marriage. You've handicapped the relationship. You've handicapped your family too.
Yeah.
Like there is a little bit of a proper compulsion to sit and say, hey, I have some thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to share what's going on with me in this.
Yeah.
Those are all appropriate and good.
Yeah.
But to back off completely, you have an Adam Eve situation that comes up. And I think that's one of those compelling reasons for us to sit and go, like, my wife is super brilliant. She disciples our children amazingly, way better than I do. I tend to be more big vision.
Yep.
She's like kind of in the works with them.
Nitty gritty.
Yeah. And there are times where I'm just like, she does it better than I do. But then there are times where I'm like, hey, I'm going to speak into some other things. I use my inspirational gifts.
Yeah.
Kayla can kind of come at things very strategical. And I have to be careful that when she's doing that, I don't think less of myself. That I can just accept that part of leading my family is allowing my wife to live in her strengths.
Sure.
And that's a good thing.
That goes back to kind of the humility thing we talked about at the beginning, right? If you're not humble enough to like introspectively look and say, these are the things I am not great at, right? These are the things that I am trying to communicate. I have oftentimes thought, because I think about emotions, I therefore think I deal with the emotions, right? I'm like, oh yeah, no, I think that's what it is. Cool, let's move on. So,
it's funny.
But I, as I'm thinking through this for myself, it's like, oh, having humility to sit with that, and like because that's a vulnerable spot that's really uncomfortable to be in. I hate that spot. It is not fun, but. Thank you for sharing that. That's just kind of as I'm processing through, like that's why humility is so foundational.
Yeah. Again, from a masculine standpoint, if you can't be humble, I think you're not as strong as you think you are.
True.
You're probably much weaker, and you can mask it up with all of the externals you want. But at the end of the day, if there's not a humble recognition of that which you are not, I would probably do some work on redefining your masculinity. Define it as something else. Define it as physical strength. Define it as bravado. Define it as intellectualism, whatever you want. But don't define it as actual masculinity. Because as far as again, I'm coming from a Christian worldview, and I know that like there ain't no man stronger than Christ Jesus. Ain't nobody stronger than him. And his strength led him to a place where he was willing to be crucified in the worst possible way for sinners, for wretched people
who hated him.
Like and the humility to hold all of that strength and power and to manage it and say, no, this is what is best. Engaging in gentleness, serving the lowly, being willing to actually engage people of great need that everybody else is fearful of. Like I don't want to touch them. Like that's
the lepers.
To pay attention where like John in his gospel says Christ paid attention to where the Father was at work and joined him in that. He didn't try to blaze a trail. He actually saw where God was at work and said, I'm going to, in essence, cooperate in that with you. That's humility. So when we sit and like my leadership coaching, I sit and go, Lord, is this what you have for me? Because if it's not, I don't want it. Could it make me a lot of money? Absolutely. I know a lot of leadership coaches that make bank doing this. But if you're not leading me to leadership coaching, I don't want to partake in this at all. And that humble recognition has allowed me, I think, to initially see a lot of good come about it. Because it's like, Lord, is this a client I should take on?
Sure.
Do I see something there? If not, they want to pay me. I don't think this is good.
Right.
Again, that humility, I think, allows us some really healthy transformative moments that you just can't get without.
That's cool. If you had the chance to talk to, a whole bunch of students, boys, men, what are some things that you might tell them? Like if they're, if they were asking you, Tim, what does it mean to be a man? What would you tell them?
The first thing I tell them is look to Jesus as your example. You will have a lot of guys around you who are probably compelling idols,
Yep.
icons,
Yep.
if you will.
Yep.
But they do not paint the full picture. They might likely have some really great examples of what this looks like,
Sure.
but look to Jesus first and then compare every other example to him.
Yep.
So that you can be honest, because I had some guys that I look up to that I'm like, dude, that's a guy I want to look
the
after.
man.
And then I'm like, oh, guess what? He was engaging in a bunch of extramarital affairs with women, and I'm throwing the baby out with the bathwater now. He
Yeah.
wasn't a man that I should ever follow.
Right.
Like, set Jesus as your example of what it looks like to be a man.
Yeah.
Secondly, as you engage with your own masculinity, like, do be fully aware that you're always being influenced by the culture.
Yeah.
You don't even realize it.
Yeah.
You are swimming and drinking the culture around you. So, like any good doctor would sit down and try to diagnose a situation with a patient,
Yeah.
they'd ask a lot of questions about what are you eating? What are you drinking? How are you sleeping? What
Yeah.
environments are you in? Let's get an idea of the toxicity of your life based upon just the reality of what you do that might inform us as to why you are the way you are right now.
Yeah.
So be aware. Like, the culture we live in is going to bombard you with everything it says and believes you should be.
Right.
And you likely have given into that. So when you have a thought about who you are, don't let it stay solely with you. Again, a thought that starts with you, remains with you, and ends with you likely has been deceived.
Mm.
You got to get these things out. So if, like, for guys, if you're sitting here thinking that masculinity is something that is really weird and strange, and you're like, I don't want to share this with anybody, I would tell you that's the moment to share it with somebody.
Yeah.
Because masculinity is formed in healthy community.
Yep.
So look to Jesus as your example first and foremost.
Yep.
Be willing to share the things that are going on inside of you so that you can get them out there.
Yeah.
You ain't a man if you living a deceived life.
Yeah.
You are a deceived person.
Yeah.
And that's really a bad place to be.
Yeah, it is.
And then the other part that I would probably encourage, like, young men and boys, is be attuned to your emotions.
Mm.
Your emotions are so good. Whether you're more cathartic in your emotions, where they're expressive, or you're a little bit more of kind of an intellectual,
Yep.
like, get them out, because your emotions need to be appropriately lived. You actually, if you don't deal with your emotions, you're a half-brained individual.
Mm.
So left and right brain hemispheres need to be operating together. The hard skills, soft skills, if you will,
Yep.
trying to make this
Yep.
simple. Like, what you do and who you are, like, emotions are a big deal.
Yeah.
And being able to express those is important. I don't know how much time we have left, if this is an important story.
Please
You've
share
got
it.
all the time in the world, man.
All the
Yeah.
time in the world.
Yeah, I
Don't
mean,
tell a guy like me that.
Another 2 hours now.
So back in October last year, I started my leadership coaching business, and then I'm pastoring a church, and it's a church plant. And now I've got all these, it's just hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
A lot of changes. We had some people in our church that were pillars that God called away, and it was bittersweet. That was hard.
Yeah.
My coaching practice, I had a little bit of some unreal expectations about how quick that would take off, or my niche. I'm like, oh gosh, surely Donald Trump will hire me as his leadership coach. And if you're a Trump fan, that wasn't a comment. I was just thinking that's how highly I thought of myself.
Right.
And none of that was panning out. And I remember back in October, I don't remember specifically when, I had a thought in my mind where all of this lack of outcomes,
Yeah.
well, it was beginning to actually impact the provision of my family.
Yeah.
And so I'm a guy, and I'm sitting here thinking I gotta
I gotta do
take
something.
effort to provide. And it just wasn't panning out. I remember having this, like, really twisted thought, and I just kind of pushed it out of my mind. But it was the thought of, generally speaking, like, hey, your family would be better off if you were dead.
Yeah.
And the reason that thought was there was because I have a life insurance policy out of myself. If I die, my family gets money.
Yep.
More money than I'm bringing in right now.
Yeah.
Well, I squashed that thought. I did not want to share it with anybody because I
Yep.
just thought it was a one-off.
Yep.
Over the next several weeks, the thoughts kept coming.
Yeah.
Over the next several months, the thoughts kept coming.
Yep.
And out of shame, not wanting to express that I actually have these really deviant thoughts, I did not share them with anybody.
Mm.
Just kept having them. If you were like watching me on a home camera, like we've got a couple cameras in our home just
Yeah.
for security purposes, you'd see me pacing my house,
Mm.
and I was running these thoughts through my mind.
Yeah.
Well, eventually, my wife called me out on it because that kind of stuff was coming out in some indulgent ways. I had a friend who came to town back in January. We went to the View House.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Hey man, I'm picking up the tab." And so I did. I had a couple beers.
Yep.
And she found out about it and she goes, "What is this? This is so unbecoming. Like, Tim, you don't drink. What is this?"
Yeah.
And I'm like dealing with this. Like, do I tell her that this was an outlet? It was
Yeah.
a moment of
You're
relief
coping.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I finally shared it with her, and I broke down, and it was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
But what I remember coming out from this moment of being honest with what was going on inside of me was, one, it no longer had power over me.
Yeah.
Two, my wife and I grew closer together because I was able to express an emotion with all of this other stuff. And she was able to speak into it. It was a lie the whole time.
Yep.
She reminded me, "You're not the provider of our home. So why are you bearing that burden on yourself? Like, the Lord provides for us, even if it doesn't look how you think it should." Well, I convinced myself that wasn't necessarily true as I owned it. And then the other part about that is that owning and that willing to share what's going on inside has actually given me so much greater freedom and creativity.
Yeah.
Like what I'm doing right now, both within Storied and within my leadership coaching, has come about because I am no longer bearing the burden of this deceitful lie in my life. And I feel like I'm much more, again, you want to talk about strength?
Yeah.
Like, I feel strong. I feel empowered now.
Yeah.
But it took some honest confession.
Yeah.
To be able to sit and say, this is what's going on inside of me. I need help.
Man, thank you for sharing that, man. I want to just commend you on your bravery, because that's not something easy to share, right? That vulnerability, especially in a room full of guys, right? Like, that's not always easy. But thank you for sharing that. I mean, I know from personal experience that story resonates with me, because I've had very similar thoughts. I've been in very similar places. Last year I was in a very similar place as well. And so hearing you share that is encouraging, man, because two things. One, guys, we're not alone. We are not alone out there. There's a bunch of dudes who are, I guarantee you, in your circle of influence, who are going through similar things. And getting it out and sharing it with people is really, really, I mean, not everybody, right? Like, you probably should be, conscientious about who you're sharing it with.
Absolutely.
Right. But sharing that with people, getting it out there, and having people be able to say, "No, dude, that's a lie. That is not true. They would not be better off without you."
Right. It's like, quick illustration. You go to the gym and you're putting up mad weight.
Yep.
But you're not doing correct form.
Yeah.
You're going to hurt yourself.
Hurt yourself. Absolutely.
To have somebody come over and be like, "Hey, that's not entirely the best thing to be doing." If you're willing to acknowledge that, think of the amount of strength you actually build in light of that.
Yep.
Like that willing to confess and be honest about our emotions in an appropriate manner is a form of strength.
Yep.
And I honestly believe, like, true masculinity, if you can't engage that, again, you're handicapped.
Yeah. You're not a real man at that point.
You're living a metaphorical castrated life. Like, you've kind of just diminished what it is to have this. And this is why in the song, like, look at David.
Yeah. David
wrote most of the Psalms we have. It is an expression of the emotions he's dealing with. They're honest confessions.
Yep.
And we would consider David a great example of what it looks to be a man.
Yep.
And that's something to just bear in mind. So yeah, getting back to, like, with boys, young men, is, I would say, may Christ be your example before any other guy.
Yep.
That's a big, big deal. Be willing to really engage the conversation of what's going on inside of you as well, because it needs to. Like, you got to share the thoughts that are going on. The culture is going to engage you, but be willing to share those feelings too. There is no weakness in that.
Yeah.
And if you have been told there's weakness in sharing your emotions, whoever's told you that is deceived themselves.
Yeah.
And one blind guy leading another blind guy ain't a good thing.
No, it's not. Well, dude, I don't know if you have any other thoughts. Mike, was there anything that you wanted to jump on and say?
No, man, I'm just enjoying the conversation back here.
Okay. I want to give you just, a minute or two if you want to share about your coaching or your fellowship, which I think is
snap.
Yeah. Share about your fellowship, man. That's kind of cool.
Yes. So a couple months ago, I started doing free community coaching, asking the Lord, like, what's my niche?
Yep.
Coaches need niches, I guess.
Yep.
I was like, Lord, what are you going to do with this? Like, who wants me to be their
Right.
coach? And so, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. You're very kind. So I started offering just coaching to the community. One, because coaching is a unique helping service. It's not counseling.
Yep.
You're not bringing somebody from past to present in terms of equilibrium. It's not consulting.
Yep.
I am not an expert in any way.
Yep.
So you don't pay me for my expertise. I'm going
Right.
to lie to you probably. I'm not also, it's not mentorship. It's
Right.
not like, Tim, you do this really well. Will you show me how to do this? Coaching, if you think old school term, coach was a vehicle to get somebody from point A to point B, where they are to where they want to be.
Yeah.
And a coach co-journeys with a person, not directing, but helping them get to whatever that thing is, gets them unstuck, helps them go farther, faster.
Yeah.
And so coaching is really meant to be just this amazing opportunity for somebody to have a person who focuses on them while they focus on the endeavor, the goal, the problem before them. So anyways, so part of community coaching was trying to get the word out, like, this is not basketball coaching.
Yeah.
It's not business coaching. They're still telling you what to do. It's like true coaching. You lead the way, but I'm going to journey with you.
Yep.
I'm going to help you. I'm going to draw things out of
Yep.
you to help you become aware.
Yep.
As I started working with people who had never done coaching before, one, some of the outcomes were beautiful to see.
Yeah.
But two, I was working with people who, and this is nothing against my colleagues. So all of my peers who are coaches, like, you do your thing. I just cannot charge people what typical coaches charge.
Sure.
Again, this is probably a little bit of my humility
Yeah.
at play, is like,
Yeah.
this is good. I can't charge you for it. Other people can, and it's probably their areas of expertise. But I was working with people who underprivileged, under-resourced, or overlooked.
Yeah.
Like they don't work in a field that provides this
Yeah.
kind of
They're not a
leadership development.
CEO. They're not a, yeah.
And so I'm working with like an array of people, and I was like, well, one, my niche is gigantic
Yeah.
because most people fall into this.
It's all of us.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's like, I have a leadership coach. Do you know why? Because he's generous.
Yeah.
He coaches me without charging me.
Mm.
He's got funds that come elsewhere. And that was actually a compelling vision for me.
Yeah.
So in light of all of that, I started thinking, which, by the way, my confession of my suicidal ideation, man, immediately gave me creative outlet again.
Mm.
I started having these, I'm an idea guy. And so that willingness to confess hard stuff, man, the Lord opened up some windows of possibility.
Cool.
So I started thinking, what would it look like to be able to provide a comprehensive and long planned out leadership coaching opportunity for people
Yep.
where they pay very little. There's always skin in the game. It's accessible because it's affordable. But what's it look like to provide this opportunity to as many people as possible?
Yep.
And eventually be able to pair them up with coaches.
Yep.
So I started something called the Leadership Coaching Fellowship. It is in beta year 1.
Yep.
Actually, I guess beta year would be 0.
Yeah.
But the concept of it is, I want to provide professional, certified leadership coaching, the best of the best, to people who would never be able to get it.
Yep.
The reason for that is my definition of leadership is very inclusive.
Which is what?
If you have influence over anybody, you are a leader.
Mm. Whoa.
Why not be the best leader possible?
Mm.
And the best form of leadership, I think, is servant leadership. It's this
Mhm.
willingness to acknowledge that my best form of leading is actually serving others. Well, let's make you an emotionally healthy, confident, resilient leader.
Yep.
So the program is a year long. And again, it's accessible to everybody because it is very affordable.
Yeah.
It's affordable because I am raising the funds outside of the participants
Yeah.
in order to actually make a living.
Right.
So all of my participants who are taking part in it, they have skin in the game because that's an honoring thing to do.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like for me, my wife and I wrestle with this a little bit, and I totally get it, because she's like, I look at the paychecks, I look at the checkbook. Okay, you can't keep giving away free coaching, Tim. And I'm like, I know, I'm working on it. I gotta get more
I'll
assertive.
get there.
I know. In the joking way of things, I'll man up. All right, give me a
Yeah.
second.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the Leadership Coaching Fellowship has just been something that's been birthed out of this desire to equip, to empower, and champion people in their areas of influence, so that we can actually see a culture shift and change, where we can watch people serve for the good of others, not for the good of themselves, which is so much more fulfilling and satisfying.
Yeah.
The long-term vision is that this will be able to serve many, many people,
Yep.
and that I can also bring, in my field, great leadership coaches. They typically stink at the business side
Yeah.
of things. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, Lord, what if I could provide them with
Clients.
coaching clients? They are outstanding coaches, pair them up,
Yeah.
and then trust you to provide for all of us in this.
Yeah.
So that's the program. So
That's
you get
cool.
11 months. It's technically 12 months long, but you get 11 months of twice a month leadership coaching, one-on-one leadership coaching, assessments to help you understand who you are, Clifton Strengths.
Yep.
We do a lot of EQ work.
Yep.
You actually take multiple EQ assessments through the program to track your emotional health and growth.
Yep.
But you set the goals, you set the agenda.
Yeah.
It is, we're just kind of getting into the midst of it now, and I love it.
That's cool.
I love it. Yeah, it's fun.
What-
And I don't know what the Lord's going to do with it. I'm
Yeah.
humble enough to acknowledge, like, it could be just this one year.
Yeah.
But I'm going to give my best to it.
Sure. What's it called? Where can people find that?
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about it, you can go to the landing page. It's timhawkinscoaching.com/LCF, which stands for Leadership Coaching Fellowship. Eventually, this is actually going to become its own thing.
Yep.
But you can learn a little bit more of it. I would actually encourage you, if you want to learn more about like coaching,
Yeah.
or if you're wanting to like take a taste of it, email me at tim@timhawkinscoaching.com. And one of the tools that we've talked about this
Yes.
because we're working on some stuff
Yep.
just within the community at large. One of the tools that I'm using, I want to offer to people,
Yep.
which is an emotional intelligence assessment,
Yep.
in which you take the assessment and then we meet together for 30 minutes and go over your results, and you get a game plan for a couple areas that potentially could impact your areas of relational struggle, leadership struggle, perhaps even like you. Like,
Yeah.
I've got a couple people who I've done this with who I've just straight up told them, like, hey, you need to meet with a counselor. You've got to
Yeah.
meet with somebody.
Yeah.
And the beauty of this is, please know this too. I don't tell people what to do often in coaching, but in those instances, it's like, you need to see a counselor. I'll help you find one.
Yeah.
And here's the deal. Ready? Like, this is the way, I think this is the way men should operate. If we meet, you need to see a counselor. You can't afford a counselor. I'll help you do it.
Yeah. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. Because again, that's really important. So
Yeah.
anyways, that was probably more than what you were asking
No, that's
for,
great.
but there's a desire of the Leadership Coaching Fellowship to really help people become emotionally healthy leaders in their areas of influence, because we all have them.
Yep.
All have them.
No, that's great, man. Well, dude, thank you for coming on, man. This is
Thanks
a
for
great
having
discussion.
me.
Yeah, this is. A
I
ton
feel
of fun.
very honored to be here and to talk about something where half the time I'm like, I don't know if I have much to offer. I mean, if you were to ask me how to wield a sword, I'd be like, I don't know how to do it. I
Pointy
really
end
don't.
goes into the other man.
That's right. That's right. You don't face it this way. But no, I'm very honored, and I love what you guys are like really trying to bring about here, especially as an encouragement.
Yeah,
I speak for myself. Like, we guys really need encouragement
we do.
because we have such a beautiful place to play in encouraging others.
Yep.
So thank you.
Awesome, man. Well, guys, thanks for joining us on Beyond the Beard. We will see you guys next time. Journey well.
When this silent, you'll be alone, far from friends in life. You'll spend your evenings getting stoned.